Thank you for joining us for another hour of Gate City Chronicles. I'm Kevin Avard, your host, and with a special guest, Ovide Lamontagne, candidate for governor.
Kevin, it's great to be here.
Well, I'm really
Thanks
honored that you're here.
Appreciate it.
So, tell us a little bit about you. We've got a presidential campaign going on,
Right.
and we have a lot of candidates that have gone through the local TV. Everybody from Buddy Roemer to you name it.
Right.
And now it's time to start looking a little bit local. What's going on with the gubernatorial race?
Well, first of all, I'm honored to be running again for governor this time. I feel very good about where we are in the campaign. It's beginning of April time frame now, and there's a lot of momentum for our campaign. A lot of good support out there throughout the state of New Hampshire. We're going to continue to build as strong a team as possible, not just to win an election, Kevin, but to serve afterwards. You can't do this alone. This is a weak form of governor, and I'm encouraged by the response I'm receiving and the support I'm getting from people around the state. I'm a fourth-generation New Hampshire native, the son of New Hampshire farmers, mill workers, and dentists. And if growing up the son of a dentist doesn't build character, you can bet growing up with a name like Ovide does, okay? It absolutely gives you some extra backbone that you might need.
You got to learn how to fight. Huh?
You do have to learn how to stand up for yourself. And and my wife and I, Betty, raised our two daughters, and they're now living on their own, and so we're empty nesters. And this is a good time, I think, for me and my family, and also I think for the people of New Hampshire, given the challenges we face both nationally and locally, for me to run for governor and to try to represent the people of New Hampshire as best I know how. And so I'm going to continue to be out there working hard.
Excellent. Well, let's talk a little bit about your resume and
Okay.
some of your qualifications,
Sure.
just for our viewers here in Nashua.
Well, I went to high school, Trinity High School in Manchester. Then I went to college at the Catholic University of America in Washington. After college, during college, I met my wife, Betty. She's been my wife of 32 years. And right out of college, we were married, and then we became high school teachers. I taught for 3 years in high school, 2 years in the Laurel, Maryland area outside of Washington. And then my high school student council advisor from Trinity became principal of a Catholic high school in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Called us up, and he said, I need a math and social studies teacher. He wanted the math teacher, because Betty's the math teacher. I'm a social studies teacher. And so we said, sure, we'll go out and teach with you. So we went out there, sight unseen. And then after my first year of teaching in Wyoming, I learned that there was a law school about 50 miles west, $750 a year tuition. Being a New Hampshire frugal Yankee, I said, I'm going. And I did. And Betty continued to teach. We adopted our first child from Wyoming Catholic Charities, and then came back to Manchester in 1986. And ironically, as luck would have it, the people living next door to my parents, the Vals, were selling their house they had been in for about 15 years, and the backyard actually connects to my parents' backyard. So they called us in the summer of 1986 and said, we're selling our house, and we put an exclusion in our real estate agreement that if we could sell directly to you, you don't have to pay the real estate fee. And I said, what made you do that? They said, we just had a feeling you might want to buy the house. And I talked to Betty, and she said, yes, let's do it. So we did. We bought the house next door to my parents. And in 1997, when my mother said, I'm the oldest of 8 kids, my mother said, I've had it with the big house, too big for me to maintain, I'm going to sell it. I said, I've got a plan for you. I said, we'll buy your house and rent our little house to you, which we did. And on Saturday before Labor Day in 1997, a moving truck came over to our house, load up the first half, went around the corner, load up my parents' house, and went back around the corner. 4 hours, the two families would move. Yeah. And I've been living in the same house I grew up in since 1997, and we've been next door to my parents for 26 years. If you've ever seen the show Everybody Loves Raymond, yeah, that's our family on steroids. And my father's name is Ovide, but my mother calls him Frank when she's upset with him. And my father calls her Marie when he gets, for whatever reason, wants to get under her skin. But, that's the sort of the New Hampshire story. Families trying to stay close to each other, connected, helping each other out. And we've never been a state that has looked to government and always been, having our hand out for government. We've been a state that has relied on the resources, the commitment that people have to one another. And I think we need to rediscover that for New Hampshire in order for us to go forward and renew the New Hampshire advantage. Professionally, I think I bring to the governor's office the kind of experience that people haven't seen in New Hampshire for a long time. I have leadership experience in all 3 sectors that I think are very important for the governor to have. Government, business, and civic and charitable work, and not necessarily in that order. I joined a law firm of Devine, Millamette, and Branch in 1986. I've been a business lawyer since then, the same firm. I've been in there for 27 years. And I'm an owner of the law firm. It's a large law firm with a lot of employees. We've had to deal with everything from, IT and, our access to the computer's age and so forth. Kevin, when I started practicing law, we were using carbon paper. Which is in 1986. You don't think it was that long ago. At least I don't feel like it was. But we were using carbon paper.
Yep. We
had one electric typewriter. We had 40 lawyers at that time. Now we're up towards 80. But
that's when the 486 came out, I think, the compact.
That's correct. It was about that time that the 486 came out. But we were in 1986 using carbon paper for most of the legal work that was being done. We had one electric typewriter in the firm that had a little cassette tape. And there you could dictate something on that cassette tape, and and then if you typed up the dictation, it would be recorded, and you could reprint it later.
That was high tech.
And that was high tech. Exactly, exactly. So I've been part of a large business and an owner of the business and a manager, as well as representing large business interests. I'm outside general counsel of the Catholic Medical Center. I served as a counsel at Dane Webster College here in Nashua that was sold to ITT Educational Services. I worked with a very good board. I try to oversee the best interests of the college. And so I've handled a number of pieces of commercial litigation, as well as been a business leader and a business lawyer for 27 years. I've also been chairman of the board at St. Mary's Bank, the nation's first credit union, built on the New Hampshire ethic of people helping people.
From Manchester.
From Manchester.
Right.
Founded in Manchester, first credit union in the country. And the rationale for the credit union was to try to provide access to capital and financial services to the French-Canadian immigrant community that had come to Manchester to work in the mills.
Were they on the west side?
On the west side, exactly. The first credit union was founded on the west side. And now it's a $750 million financial institution, 60,000 members, largely families, working-class families, and small businesses. And I was responsible for overseeing with the management team our commercial lending products, our real estate market, and our small business, and also small financial marketplace for our members. And we have to comply with state and federal regulations. You have employment issues. We converted the credit union's pension program from a defined benefit pension plan to a contributory benefit plan,
right,
which is what we need to be doing at the state level.
Well, I think we're actually heading there now. I sit on pensions myself.
You do, okay,
yeah,
great.
As well as redress of grievance.
Well, we need to be doing that.
Defined contributions, I believe.
That's correct.
We're looking at.
And I think at the very least, and I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but the state should be starting right now for new employees to create a new system, a new defined contribution plan. And for your listeners out here who are listening to this, the defined contribution plan basically enables an employee to make it a contribution towards their retirement. The state will match a percentage as an employer, like a 401k, and it gives ownership and control for that employee over that plan, as opposed to the defined benefit plan, which simply says these are the benefits you're going to get, and it's basically an unfunded liability in the future that is going to crush us if we don't deal with this.
Well, yeah, they've been talking about that unfunded liability for a while now.
Yes.
It really will crush us. And the problem is there's the solution, but it seems nobody wants the change. They feel they're going to lose their benefits, and it's not. We have to do something, and if we do nothing, we go bankrupt.
Kevin, we've done this in the private sector, throughout the private sector, whether it's in service or manufacturing businesses. We've gone from the defined benefit model to the defined contribution model, and government is the last holdout for employees to go in this direction. So it's not like something we're asking state employees to do that's different than what the rest of the country is doing. But I bring experience about handling something like that in the governor's office. And the governor's office the governor's a manager. He's the executive of the state, overseeing state government in terms of the day-to-day operations. And I can bring that business experience. I've also been, I've been in business, a business leader, one of the top business lawyers of the country, recently named. And so, I bring that to the office. I've also been in government. I've worked as legal counsel to the state senate in 1991, a very difficult time for New Hampshire. You may recall that back then there were 4 of our major banks were taken over by the federal government. Public service was in bankruptcy. There was a very steep recession, actually one that was probably steeper or more difficult for us than the current one we're coming out of, hopefully coming out of. And I worked with the state legislature at that time, in the Senate specifically, to work through our state's problems. And so I know the legislative function. And then in 1993, I was appointed by Governor Merrill to serve as chairman of the State Board of Education. I was confirmed by the Executive Council, and I was reappointed later on. So I've been appointed and confirmed twice, the only candidate for governor who's had an executive leadership position in government. And we did a lot of good things, Kevin, under my leadership at the State Board of Education. We did things like fight to enact charter school legislation. I teamed up with Senator Rubins, worked with Governor Merrill. We got that law passed. It wasn't perfect, and we knew that, but it created an opportunity for a public school to really operate outside of the traditional apparatus. It creates more opportunity for choice in the public sector.
And you were a teacher. And if you don't mind, let me digress just a little bit.
Sure.
Because, and talk a little bit about right to work, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I know we're on the idea of education. But you're a teacher.
Yes.
And yet you still support right to work. Can you clarify? Right now, it seems to me a lot of teachers are really worried about right to work, and they feel as though they're going to lose their benefits or something. I'm not exactly sure, but does this threaten teachers?
It should not. In fact, right to work is, as you know, is really about employee freedom of choice. When I announced for governor, I was the first candidate to announce for governor. It was right after, actually, I was planning to announce, expecting I'd be running against Governor Lynch. He announced 3 days before we announced on September 19th that he was not going to seek re-election. But on that day, I made my commitment in support of right to work, and I received a call the next day from a woman in Manchester who was a trained accountant. She had been working in her husband's business. He had died a couple years earlier unexpectedly. She had spent her time unwinding his business affairs, helping to educate her or see her teenage son through high school as a widow. And then when he went to college, she wanted to get back into the workforce. She saw a job advertised for a part-time bookkeeper / accountant in a fairly substantial business. She went and interviewed. They loved her. She loved them. She wanted, in the worst way, to go back into the workplace. And so when she went to sign the papers after they extended her an offer, one of the papers was to join a union. And she said to them, I'm a part-time employee, and I don't want to be part of the union. And they said to her, you have to be part of the union to work here. And she said, well, but I'm opposed to what the union stands for and what it does outside of the workplace. And the people said, there's no option. You either have to sign this paper, become part of the union, or else you can't work here. And Kevin, she stepped away from that job. And they lost a great employee, and she lost a wonderful opportunity for herself. And she said to me, Ovide, whatever you can do to get right to work here, you'll be standing up for people like me. Mm-hmm. And that's what this is about. It's about freedom of choice for employees. It does nothing to take away collective bargaining rights of employees. They can still have collective bargaining rights. The union is still in the workplace. But individuals can say, you know what, I want to work here. I'll give up the benefits that the union is actually negotiating on my behalf. I'll do it on my own with this employer to work here. And that's what it is. Now, if we enact right to work, the benefit is that it puts New Hampshire on the map as being open for business. It'll attract new businesses from around the country who want to come to New Hampshire, or at least look at us as a state that stands with employees. And we would be the only state north of Virginia, east of Indiana, that is a right to work state. It costs no money for the state. It'll be a huge kickstart for our economic renaissance, which we need to have happen in New Hampshire. And that's why I support right to work. And it should not be a threat to teachers or any public employees at all. It's not about taking away their rights. It's about enhancing their rights to choose not to be part of that union.
Let me ask you a little bit about the, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the exchange and the compacts right now.
A little bit, yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about which one of those you support as far as with the Obamacare? Hopefully, I got my feelings on Obamacare. I just hope the Supreme Court does us some good justice here.
Well, Kevin, I do, as I said, I practice law and health care, among the things I've done, and I've served for 13 years as outside general counsel at the Catholic Medical Center in Manchester. I've seen the healthcare system from the inside, and I've seen how federal rules, regulations, and laws have really manipulated and distorted the healthcare market. And that's before Obamacare, before the Affordable Care Act was enacted, and now they're trying to administer it. The very first thing I will do, Kevin, if I'm elected governor, is to direct the Attorney General to join the suits with the other state against the federal government on Obamacare. Don't make the mistake, and people listening to this program should not be lulled into a sense of complacency that if the Supreme Court even says that the part of the bill or part of the law is unconstitutional will mean the entire bill gets shot down. That is, I don't believe that's going to happen. There was some discussion about that at oral argument. There are severability provisions. And so while a part of the bill may be unconstitutional, I think the entire thing should be struck down ultimately. But there will continue to be an effort by this administration to force onto the people of New Hampshire a one-size-fits-all socialized medicine approach, single-payer system run by government. That's the agenda of this administration. We should have been the lead state in suing the federal government. And along those lines, for those people who are watching the program who say, we're just talking about it. No, I've done this. When I was chairman of the State Board of Education in the mid-'90s, the federal government tried to offer education stimulus money in the form of Goals 2000. One more effort by the federal government to put its foot in the door of our schools, which it's been doing way too much of. I think we should abolish the U.S. Department of Education and empower entirely the states, block grant the money to us, let the states run the schools with the local communities and school districts, teachers and principals and families, and get out of the business of trying to micromanage education. Our state board in the mid-'90s was the only one in the country to say no to Goals 2000, to say to the federal government, we're not going to trade off more of our sovereignty over education, more control over education to you in exchange for the return of our own money. And that was not very popular at the time because the education establishment very much was upset that we were supposedly turning down money for children.
All this free money.
This was not free money. It was about bureaucracy. It was about strings. Yeah. And we did the right thing. I stood up to the federal government then. I will certainly stand up to the federal government now, especially now. And Kevin, the only way we're going to save this country is if we have strong leadership at the state level, like a Chris Christie, like we've seen Scott Walker, deal with the federal government as well as their own responsibilities in the state to try to right the ship of their states in order to help the nation survive. And it is about survival. And we, as a people and as states of this country, have allowed Washington to do way too much in terms of education control, now in terms of health care, and frankly in terms of business regulation. And there's no one who's running for governor who has anywhere near the experience. In fact, they don't have any experience when it comes to dealing with the federal government and dealing with it on substantive terms and also fighting it. So that was my work as chairman of the State Board of Education. So I have business leadership experience, government leadership experience, and in the civic and charitable world, and I think you know this as a state rep, New Hampshire's quite exceptional because we don't ask government to do everything. We ask government to try to fund programs and work with the private sector. So we have area agencies which are largely private sector charities helping to provide the disability community support and assistance through their programs. And the mental health system is driven in large part by private organizations working in collaboration with the state. I've been on the Easter Seals board. I've been chairman of the board I've been on the board of CASA, Court-Appointed Special Advocates. I've worked with the Moore Center in the capital campaign. I've worked with the New Hampshire Food Bank and their capital campaign. I've been involved in a number of civic and charitable organizations that provide assistance directly to the people. And I know that system, and people in leadership within the private charities of our state know me. In addition, I was president of the Dan Webster Council, our Boy Scout organization. And don't you think New Hampshire and the nation would be better off with more people who know the Scout Oath and Law and are committed to live it? And, I was honored to serve as president of the Dan Webster Council for 4 years, and I've been on that board for almost 10 years prior to that. It's a great organization. Again, one more organization in the private sector that's doing the work of creating a higher standard of living for us in New Hampshire. And we need to continue to work in partnership with the private sector to leverage the benefits, the programs we offer our citizens, particularly the disability community. I'll share with your audience too, Kevin, that my wife and I have been foster parents of a special needs child since he was 2 weeks old. He came to us in 1988, and he's now 23 years old. We're his guardians. We work with the state to make sure that the private sector, in collaboration with the state, are providing him the programs and services he needs. Being conservative does not mean you're not compassionate. Being conservative means you have a way of approaching serving the truly needy in our state. And that isn't just by government largesse, it's by government strategically working with the private sector. And we know how to do that. We know the system. And so I'm sorry I'm going on, but I want your audience to know.
We asked about your resume, and this
the
is
depth of it.
We want people to actually know.
And they can learn more on ovid2012.com. If they can spell the name, OVIDE2012.com, ovid2012.com. And there's information about my background, my family, my work experience, and then the blueprint that I've already published for over 2 months now about what I'd like to do as the governor of New Hampshire, what areas I'd focus on, and the kind of initiatives I'd bring to the table.
Excellent. Well, now that the campaign is going and it's up and running, I haven't sensed any hostility in New Hampshire.
Right.
I haven't. You know, we're all used to the national level and the debates and the rhetoric and the tension. And they haven't even run. Whoever's the candidate hasn't even run against Obama. That's going to be like fireworks.
Right.
But here on the gubernatorial, it seems to be low key.
Right.
And talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, that'll change, of course, as we get closer to a primary, if there is a primary, and then, of course, in the general election. A couple of thoughts, I guess. For those in the audience who don't know, I ran for U.S. Senate in 2010. And those people who do know that I ran for the United States Senate in 2010 know that it was a very contested and sometimes very contentious primary. But I didn't become contentious, and I didn't go negative. We stayed in a very positive message. Kelly Ayotte was our front runner, and I came within 1% of winning that vote. And instead of calling for a recount, I said we need to get behind Kelly and help her. And I'm proud to call Kelly Ayotte my U.S. Senator. I think she's doing a very good job. I was honored to be part of that primary process. But I think I showed, and our campaign showed the people in New Hampshire, that there's a way to run effectively with limited resources, and God knows we had limited resources, and still get a message out that resonates with people, and to do it with the kind of decorum and diplomacy that is expected. I mean, you can disagree on issues, but you don't have to be disagreeable and get personal. And I'm concerned. I expect fully that in a general election, there will be the politics of personal destruction will sort of emerge themselves from the Democratic Party side. That's sort of their MO because they're wrong on the issues, and so they're going to have to make it about personality. I will do my level best to resist the temptation to get down in the gutter with the Democrats on personality, and that's the leadership. There are some really good Democrats who are going to be with us, and we're going to have a good Democrats for Ovid group, and I'm honored to have good folks reaching out to me to be part of our team. But
You've
we're going to
been
be
bipartisan
positive.
in the past, though. I mean, you've had to work with the Senate, you've had to work with the House.
Yes.
In your previous life.
Correct.
So you know how to be bipartisan. You know how to work and reach across the aisle.
Right. And you do that when you learn that when you work in charities, particularly, because they're not all conservatives or Republicans. In fact, you're the minority if you're a conservative Republican. But you can work together. And I say to the people to whom I speak on the campaign trail, particularly Republican groups, because I want them to hear this from me directly. If I'm elected governor, I am going to leave my party label at the State House door. When I go into that governor's office to work, it's going to be to represent the people and the businesses of the state. It's not going to be simply to apply a litmus test to people who come to see me about problems or about solutions. I won't care whether or not they're independents, Democrats, libertarians, vegetarians. It makes no difference. There should be no litmus test to service. Now, I'm going to be true to my values and my principles, which I think people expect, but I think there's a way to work in a comprehensive basis with people who aren't necessarily of your party to get the job done. And I think the people in New Hampshire expect the governor to be about party labels and when it comes to managing state government, because you need to have the best and the brightest who may not be, again, affiliated with you, working to provide services to the people of New Hampshire. So I'll have a chance to, I think, show the people what it can be like in New Hampshire to work across the aisle and with all comers about solving our state's problems.
So, Ovid, let me ask you a little bit about some things that are germane just to Nashua and some of the surrounding towns, if you don't mind me. One of the issues is the commuter rail. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about that and the transit, the whole issues?
Well, I'm intrigued about the idea of bringing a rail up to Nashua. I think there's been a lot of talk about bringing it from Nashua to Manchester to Concord. I'm not sure we can't do this by phases. In other words, let's look at what it will take to work collaboratively with the northern Massachusetts communities, Tingsboro and all, and I know Mayor Lozo's done a nice job reaching out to the south of us to try to find a coalition of cities and towns that would work on trying to make sure that a rail can come right to Nashua as the railhead. And then from there we can say, what will it take us to get here? You know, unlike, maybe I'm different than some of my colleagues in the conservative movement, but it's not about, you know, global warming or any of that. It's about providing another alternative mode of transportation to New Hampshire for people who might choose to do it that way, get on the rails. And I think it makes a lot of sense. The rail bed's already there. The rights of way are already there. It's about upgrading that rail bed so we can go from Lowell to Nashua at the very least. And if we have some money to look at studying beyond that, maybe we can study it.
I think the study is one of the key issues at this point, at this stage. I know some of the big fears that seem to come across my path are, well, is it going to be another Amtrak? You know, is it going to be another hole that we just keep throwing money into? Right. But there again, there's got to be ways that we can figure this out. Like you said.
I think so too. I think there have to be ways, and we should look at alternative means. And people who've been around, traveled around the country. I mean, not everything's at an Amtrak level. If you go to, if you fly into BWI in Baltimore, in the Baltimore area, and you take the MARC, which is a sort of a lower level, you know, rail system from BWI down to Union Station. That's a very nice ride. It's a nice train, but it's not of the level of an Amtrak, which is a higher grade, you know, train. I think a MARC type train would be very, very suitable. And then, you know, if you want to go down to Fenway or something, you can hop into Nashua and then just shoot down to Boston and not worry about the parking and all. I think that'd be very attractive, frankly. But anyways, we need to look at it. And right now we have an active railway, anyways. I mean, if you're in Manchester behind the Fisher Cat Stadium, you'll find, you know, cargo transportation happening on the rails.
Oh, that's how we get our coal.
That's right. So, you know, I just think we should continue to evaluate it and see what makes sense for the region. So I'm not opposed to it.
Another issue that's come up before the House, if you don't mind. I have an inside track up there, you know.
Yes, you do.
Gambling.
Yes.
And I guess I voted against it, and for a few reasons that I thought, we're putting money into a lot of money into a few people's hands, and corruption doesn't seem to be too far behind. I don't think, my personal opinion, I know the show's about you, but I don't think that gambling is the solution to fixing the state's problems.
Mm-hmm. Right.
What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I've always been opposed to expanded gambling in my earlier run for office, and I just don't see that it helps the quality of life in New Hampshire. I certainly would not support expanded gambling if it meant providing more revenues to fund state government. And it would have to be used, those revenues would have to be used in a way to lower the tax burden on our people. For example, if you had gambling revenues distributed through an Augenblick formula, which is the state aid formula, which we used to use the lottery monies to use. Now it gets rolled into a state funding mechanism. But if we ever pass a constitutional amendment to get out from under the cloud of Claremont, so we could revitalize an Augenblick formula, that's where money could be used to be distributed to help the poor communities of our state lower their tax burden. That I might be open to, but so that would be the reason. I mean, the income can't be used to just grow state government. And I don't care if it's not a tax, if it's taking money from the private sector to support government growth. That's just not where I think we should be deploying how we should be deploying our resources. However, I would say this, that I'm not going to close the door to having a proposal submitted to me that's limited, focused, controlled, that doesn't adversely impact the quality of life in New Hampshire. Rockingham Park is a natural location, seems to me, for at least bringing back horse racing, and maybe have some other type of gambling that would happen there. But beyond that, I just don't think that it's consistent with our quality of life. So my presumption is no, even though I'm a practicing Catholic and bingo's like an eighth sacrament for us. It's not a moral issue for me. Yeah. It's not a moral issue. It is an issue about the quality of life for New Hampshire, and I just don't think it's consistent with it as a general rule.
talking about Rockingham, that kind of brings up the topic of tourism. What do you think about
Yeah.
tourism, and how do you think that we can develop our tourism here in the state?
Well, you know, I think conservation and tourism go hand in hand. I think that for a lot of people who come to New Hampshire, it's about the natural beauty we have, the mountains, the lakes, access to the ocean, and the natural features we have in New Hampshire. So we have to continue to be proactive about our conservation efforts to conserve our natural resources in the pristine areas and so forth. And tourism also is going to be driven by marketing. We need to spread the word a little more proactively about what we have to offer here in New Hampshire, not just to our friends in Massachusetts, but also to, how about to our neighbors to the north in Canada. The exchange rate now is about on parity. And you know, if you meet, and of course, from the name like Ovide Lamontagne, I do speak French, and I know people, I'm related to people in Canada. And you talk to folks in Canada, our second largest trading partner is Canada, the largest part of Canada is Quebec. And you say, you know, do you know anything about New Hampshire? Oh, yeah, I go to your beaches all the time. I summer at Old Orchard Beach. I'm like, no, Old Orchard is not New Hampshire. And there's so much more about us that people don't know. So we need to be more creative. It doesn't have to mean a lot of money. Just be tactical about promoting New Hampshire, what we have to offer, and to help our tourism industry.
Yeah, maybe we should get a star there to do a little commercial for us. I remember seeing all the time, come to Michigan. You know, they have the golf courses and all the lakes and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Maybe we can do something like that.
Maybe we could, and we can do it in a targeted way. So I really want to continue to support that very important industry for us. And coming back to the whole gambling issue, I mean, I think it's counter to our tourism ethic in New Hampshire to have, you know, gambling locations that are going to discourage families from coming to our state. We have to recognize this. I hear people say to me all the time, well, you know, if we don't have gambling in New Hampshire, we're going to lose money to Maine or Massachusetts. And I say, we lose money to Maine and Massachusetts right now. I mean, how many of our New Hampshire citizens go to Fenway Park to watch the Red Sox? And we're not going to bring the Red Sox to New Hampshire, and yet people go down there. We have to recognize that in our region, there's some things we're going to do well in New Hampshire, some things we're not going to do in New Hampshire at all. So it isn't the fact that people will go somewhere else. They will go anyways. It's about what is the strength of the state.
Right.
And we need to be about renewing the New Hampshire advantage. Differentiating is a very important part of the strategy of renewing that New Hampshire advantage, so people see that New Hampshire is materially different than the other states. No broad-based taxes makes us materially different, which is why a lot of people come to New Hampshire to live, to raise a family, to run a business. They don't want the broad-based taxes. And I will veto any broad-based tax that comes to my desk, and I'll work hard to make sure our expenses are contained so that there's no upward pressure, which this last few years of the Lynch administration was pushing us in terms of spending to lead to a broad-based tax. We have to be disciplined on the spending side. Right. And we have to be smart about reforming state government so we're not creating an impetus for state policymakers to try to find alternative revenue sources to sustain a bloated government. And we have a lot of, I think, opportunities to reform state government to make the life of our citizens so much
I think
better.
you have a willing party up there to reform.
Well, I certainly hope so.
One of the other issues, that, you know, in this whole process of managing things a little bit more conservatively, we still have to worry about our infrastructure.
Yes.
And one of the issues that's come up time and time again, to me, our bridges,
Right.
some of our roads. We have some of the best roads in the area, but we still have to keep them up. And our bridges, I know they need a lot of work.
Right. Well, there's no question that people expect that state government, among other things, looks at infrastructure in terms of commerce and transportation. So we need to make a priority of certain projects. I-93 widening, the completion of that has to be a priority for us, and that should be done. That's going to benefit the entire state. That isn't just going to benefit a corridor from Salem up to Manchester. It's going to benefit the entire region if we can get people in New Hampshire a little quicker, a little easier, and let them leave a little quicker and easier too when they go back to their home state.
If you're ever up there during race week, my gosh, you know,
it's unbelievable.
It's crawl space.
Yeah, and so we need to find other ways of having the revenues necessary to support our upgrades, and people, I think, over time will see that that's an important area of focus for us. You know, the other thing, Kevin, that I think this is an infrastructure issue, particularly for our New Hampshire businesses, is that we are heavily regulated. And people in New Hampshire think we're the live free or die state until what they would be saddened by is the extent of regulations in our state. I want to be a governor who's known as a governor who's reduced the overall burden from a regulatory perspective, which is the branch of government over which I'd have some say and oversight. The second thing I would do after directing the Attorney General to join the suits against Obamacare, and by the way, if he said no, I would do it myself. The Constitution of New Hampshire allows the governor to bring an action in his name on behalf of the state of New Hampshire and her people, and I would do it myself.
I hear them clapping.
I will do it myself, and I'll also bring other like-minded attorneys to help me draft a complaint. So whether it's the Attorney General or me, the day of the inauguration, we're on record as doing whatever we can to stop the federal government from taking over health care. Second thing I would do, issue a 90-day moratorium on rules and regulations that are working their way through to be approved, and to require all administrative agencies to conduct an economic impact analysis. Let the cities and towns, the businesses, the families of our state know what it's going to cost to comply with the rules and regulations that you're promulgating, and then tell us what the benefit is for which we're bearing that cost. We don't do a good job in New Hampshire taking stock of what the true cost is in these rules and regulations. And then let's start removing and repealing rules and regulations that have become outdated, antiquated, conflicting. And then finally, let's have a stable, consistent application of rules and regulations. That's one of the biggest complaints I hear about our tax system. It's not the rate of taxes so much in terms of business tax. It's the unpredictability, whether it's executive compensation, whether it's a business that's running a loss but still has to pay a business enterprise tax. There needs to be some stability and certainty for businesses to succeed. That's an infrastructure issue.
Right.
And so, and the other thing I will say to you, I think that in order to shrink the power of the regulators and the administrative agencies of our state, the legislature needs to do its work of passing bills that are complete. And when the legislature passes a bill and says, oh, by the way, here's a provision that says we will delegate to or authorize the Department of Resources and Economic Development to promulgate rules on this issue, you're transferring legislative authority to the executive branch where it does not belong. The administrative branch, the executive branch is supposed to administer and enforce the law, not make the law. Exactly. And we have lost sight of that in America. We've lost sight of it in Congress, for sure. We've lost sight of it in Concord. The legislature should pass legislation that is complete and gives the detail. Now, you may direct an agency to implement or enforce that particular bill, and they may have to come up with some rules to sort of help, fill in a couple of details. But it shouldn't be this enabling legislation that turns over the power of legislation to the executive branch.
Right. I think we're seeing that over and over and over again, and it is a headache.
So the best way to do that is to go to biennial sessions, either by way of a constitutional amendment, again, or by rules, and by internal rule of the Senate and the House agreeing, the two bodies will only meet 1 year out of the 2 years, and meet the second year if there's an emergency. But we're going to get all of our work done, including adopting our budget, in the year one. Year two, we're going to plan. We're going to develop the details to the bills that we'll want in the out year in the next session to bring forward that are really going to add value to New Hampshire. Let's stop this process of nitpicking on issues. I mean, whether or not the Magna Carta should be something that's it just gets us off the mark.
Right.
And I understand the principle of that, but gets us off the mark for what we need to do for the people of New Hampshire. Let's focus our attention on the meat and potato bills that we need to pass. Mm-hmm. And that's what I would certainly, why I suggest a biennial session. So you have a limited executive branch, you have a focused legislative branch that gets the work done for the people.
I know Lori Sanborn, she's a state rep, actually, they're going to be from Bedford before long.
Yes.
She's the head of the New Hampshire Business Coalition. Just to sound off of something you said, the rules and regulations, we're as bad as California, if not worse, in certain areas. And it's very, it's killing us, it's choking us. And I think it was Senator White that brought a bill for biennial
sessions.
Yeah, biennial sessions. And there's some willing souls up there. We're struggling. We're fighting up there in the legislative part. We're trying to get these ideas up there, but we just need a little help.
Right.
Yeah, so
I think the problem is that people in the legislature may fear that you're transferring too much authority to the executive branch. I say you're not if you're passing bills that are complete and not requiring the executive branch to be filling in the margins or actually filling in all the details, which is a real problem.
well, we're running out of time right now, but I wanted to get our viewers to, if they want to contribute to your campaign or if they want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
They can do this online, so the easiest way to do it is to go to ovide2012.com, O-V-I-D-E, don't forget the E on the end of the name, 2012.com. There you'll find positions that I have on the issues, my blueprint that's been out for over 2 months, and also an opportunity to sign up as a volunteer. We're recruiting what I call O-Depots. These are families or businesses in every voting precinct of the state who want to help us put up signs, distribute bumper stickers, and then recruit people to hold signs at the polls on the primary day and the general election day. And the O-Depot network is going to help me govern too, because I'm committing to the people who want to volunteer with us that I want them to work with me when I'm the governor, so that I can be their voice in Concord, but they can be my eyes and ears in the communities of our state. And then we can work together to get the message out and initiatives we're trying to take on and get information back about issues or challenges. It doesn't make sense to me that we would spend all this time trying to organize a campaign team only to let it go fallow between elections. We should continue to be working together, and I want people to do that. So you can sign up to do that if you.
It's not too early to get signed to get on the wagon, if you will.
Not at all. You can to get what now?
Get on the wagon or get on the train. I was going to say
it's not too early at all. You know, the primary isn't until September 11th.
Right.
And it'll be an opportunity then to hopefully win that primary so that we can have the energy behind us to win the general election. I am not running for office to win a primary and to lose a general election. I'm running for office to make a difference by winning that general election and serving the people of New Hampshire. And for anyone who knows my career and my public service and having been a candidate before, when you run and you lose by a little bit, it brings out the ego and the pride. This is about service, and I hope that people understand that. It's what motivates me, and I hope they'll join our team. And
well, all things work together for good.
They do. I feel that way.
Yeah.
And so we're just going to give it our best shot and hope that we can earn the people's support.
Ovide, thank you very much for joining us.
Kevin, it's a pleasure.
I appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
And thank you for spending some time with us here on Gate City Chronicles. If you have any questions with Ovide, please contact his website. And until next week, we'll see you.